This week's serial killer is a suggestion from my friend Big Los. Shout out to Big Los, and I'm always taking suggestions for any serial killers you're interested in hearing about. In a small New Mexico town, there was a man who lived a life that looked completely normal. He worked, he socialized, and to the people around him, nothing seemed out of place. But behind that normal routine, he had spent years building something hidden, something carefully designed, controlled, and kept out of sight. This wasn't random or impulsive. It was planned over time, piece by piece. For years, stories surfaced but never fully connected. People came forward, but their voices weren't always heard. And it all continued until one person found a way to escape and finally bring everything to light. Today, we're talking about David Parker Ray, and a case that still leaves people asking the same question: how did this go on for so long? Welcome back to Serial Killers from Around the World. I'm Rachael the Gem, and this is a series where we explore the most disturbing crimes across history and the people who committed them while hiding in plain sight. Please make sure you like, follow, and subscribe so you don't miss out on my episodes. But first...
Hello. Do you want to play a game?
Last week I showed you these 3 people. One of them is a serial killer. The correct answer for this week is A. Anthony Sowell was an American serial killer from Cleveland, Ohio, who is known as the Cleveland Strangler. Between 2007 and 2009, he targeted vulnerable women, many struggling with addiction, luring them in his home where they later were killed. For years, concerns about his property were raised, but the full extent of his crimes was not uncovered until a victim escaped and alerted police. When authorities searched his home, they discovered multiple bodies inside and around the property, revealing the scale of the crimes that have gone unnoticed in the community. Sowell was convicted of numerous murders and sentenced to death. He died in prison in 2011. If you chose B, you chose Felix Asalama Akpo. He is wanted for his alleged involvement in a business email compromise scheme that defrauded over 70 different businesses in the United States, resulting in a combined losses of over $6 million. If you chose C, you chose John Dillinger. He was an American gangster during the Great Depression. He commanded the Dillinger Gang, which was accused of robbing 24 banks and 4 police stations. Here are the 3 people for this week. One of these 3 is a serial killer. This person committed their crimes at a very young age, shocking investigators and the public alike. At first, the violence seemed sudden and personal, driven by conflict within the home. But there was also an earlier act that suggested something deeper was already developing. After the crimes, this individual attempted to create a different story to avoid suspicion, showing awareness and planning beyond what many expected. Later, their case gained widespread attention, not just because of what they did, but because of who they claimed to be afterward. Drop your guesses in the comments below, and next week we'll reveal the answer. David Ray Parker was born in 1939 in Belen, New Mexico, and from early on, his life lacked stability. He was raised largely by his grandparents in an environment that had often been described as strict and emotionally distant. His father was mostly absent, but when he did appear, he brought with him influences that would leave a lasting impression, exposing Ray to materials such as BDSM-themed magazines and ideas far beyond what a child should have been exposed to. As he grew older, Ray became increasingly withdrawn. He struggled socially, was often bullied, and turned inward rather than forming meaningful connections. Over time, his thoughts began to take shape in ways that were no longer abstract. They became specific, repetitive, and deeply rooted. Unlike many people who outgrow harmful impulses, Ray carried those thoughts into adulthood and eventually began acting on them. David Ray Parker didn't act on impulse. He created a system. Just outside his home in Elephant Butte, New Mexico, there was a trailer that appeared ordinary from the outside. But inside, it had been transformed into something calculated and deliberate. He had spent years and $100,000 modifying it, sealing it off so that nothing inside could be heard beyond its walls. He called it his toy box. Inside, everything had a purpose. The layout, the restraints, the equipment, it all reflected planning and repetition. This wasn't a one-time act. It was something that had been built, refined, and used over time. Investigators later described the space as organized and methodical, designed to maintain complete control over anyone brought inside. But one of the most disturbing elements wasn't just what was in the room, it was what victims were made to hear.
I get my excitement from making a woman happy. My trailer had numerous toys in it of different types. I got pleasure out of
Ray had recorded his own voice on an audio tape, which he would play for the victims after they regained consciousness. The tone was calm, almost instructional, as he laid out what he claimed would happen. It wasn't chaotic or emotional, it was controlled. That recording wasn't just about intimidation. It was about establishing power, reinforcing that this was something he had done before and believed he could continue doing. And he didn't do it alone. His partner, Cindy Hendy, was actively involved. She didn't resist what was happening. She participated in it, reinforcing the environment Ray had created. Their connection was built around shared behavior, not opposition. At times, others were also drawn into it, including his own daughter, Glenda Jess Ray, who was accused of helping bring at least one victim to the property. Ray also put his victims in wooden contraptions that bent them over and immobilized them, while he and his dogs and sometimes other friends would them. Victims were often approached when they were alone and vulnerable in ways that didn't immediately raise suspicion. Once they were taken to the property, they were held for extended periods. Ray maintained control through restraint, psychological manipulation, and the use of substances that left victims disoriented and struggling to recall what happened. In some cases, victims were later released, left on the side of the road, confused with fragmented memories that didn't fully make sense. And because of that, many of them weren't believed. Everything changed in March of 1999. A woman named Cynthia Vigil had been taken and held at Ray's property. But after several days, she found an opportunity to escape. She managed to free herself, and despite still being visibly restrained, she ran, desperate to find help. When she reached someone who believed her, they called the police, and everything was set in motion. Law enforcement responded quickly, and when they arrived at Ray's property, they began uncovering evidence that confirmed this was far more than just a single incident. The trailer, the equipment, the setup. It's all pointed to something that has been happening for years. As the investigation continued, other victims came forward. Some had tried to report what happened to them but weren't taken seriously at the time. Now they were being heard. As investigators began putting the case together, it became clear that David Parker Ray had not been operating alone. What unfolded wasn't just the story of one individual, it was a network of people who were either directly involved or aware of what was happening and failed to stop it. Cindy Hendy, Ray's partner, played one of the most active roles. She wasn't just present, she participated in the crimes and helped maintain control over the victims. In the case that ultimately led to their arrest, it was Hendy who remained behind while Ray went to work, and it was during that window that Cynthia Vigil managed to escape. When Vigil tried to get free, Hendy attempted to stop her, leading to a physical struggle that ended with Vigil breaking away and running for help. After their arrest, Hendy chose to cooperate with investigators. Her testimony became a critical part of the case, helping prosecutors establish what had been happening inside the trailer and how long it had been going on. In exchange for her cooperation, she received a reduced sentence. Hendy was convicted on multiple charges related to kidnapping and abuse and was sentenced to decades in prison. Years later, she was granted parole and eventually released, a decision that sparked strong reaction given the severity of the case. What makes this part of the story especially difficult to process is that it wasn't just one person acting in secrecy. There were multiple individuals, each aware to some degree, each making decisions that allowed things to continue. And while some cooperated with investigators and others accepted plea deals, the outcomes left lingering questions, not just about accountability, but about how something like this was able to exist for so long without being fully exposed. Another person involved was his daughter, Glenda Jess Ray. Her role in the case added a layer that many found especially disturbing. According to the investigators, Jessie was directly involved in at least one incident where a victim was brought to her father's property under false pretenses. In one case, she was accused of gaining a woman's trust, socializing with her, and ultimately leading her into a situation where she was no longer safe. That level of involvement showed that this wasn't just awareness, it was participation. What makes her story even more complicated is that years before the case came to light, Jessie had actually contacted the FBI. She reported that her father was involved in abducting and harming women. However, the information she provided at the time was considered too vague. By the time the investigation fully unfolded years later, her role had shifted from someone raising concern to someone who became part of what was happening. After the arrest, Jessie Ray was charged with kidnapping and criminal sexual conduct. Rather than go through a full trial, she entered a plea, accepting responsibility for her role in the case. She was ultimately sentenced to a relatively short prison term, followed by probation. In 2002, before questioning could take place, David Parker Ray died of a heart attack while in custody. With his death, many questions were left unanswered. Investigators believe there could have been many more victims, but without confirmation, those cases remain unsolved. Next week, we're diving into a very chilling case. This was someone who appeared quiet, unassuming, even forgettable. But behind the exterior was a mind driven by deeply disturbing compulsions that stretched across decades. Known by multiple haunting nicknames, their actions shocked the nation and left a mark that still lingers today. What makes this case even more haunting isn't just what was done, but how long it continued, and the claims that were later made about the number of victims. This is a story that goes beyond what most people expect, and it's one you won't forget.
I didn't just go out and start killing. Everything started happening when I was just 13 years old.
Why did you kill those people?
No comments. No comments. I cannot answer that at this time.
Person would drink it, fall asleep, that's when they would be strangled.